Hello and welcome to another Times Radio Members Question and Answer. Now today we're answering comments from our channel members on Frontline episodes and other videos about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. I'm Philip Ingram. I'm one of the presenters of Times Radio Frontline, but I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer and global commentator on all matters geopolitics, defence, security, conflict, cyber, terrorism, and anything else people will cross my palm with silver to talk about. But we've got some fantastic comments today, and there's a lot going on in the background around Ukraine that will come out in the coming days over the holiday period for those that are managing to take some holiday. But let's get straight into your comments and points to me. First one comes from Marty. Welcome back, Marty, and season's greetings, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you. You say, I fully expect the current peace talks to get stranded somewhere as Russia won't accept anything but the complete capitulation of Ukraine, which will not happen either. Thus, the war will continue until Russia runs out of steam or Europe folds and stops supporting Ukraine, e.g. financially, as their budget for 2026 is quite leaky. Marty, you're 100% right. The one person that doesn't want there to be a peace deal is Vladimir Putin. He hasn't changed anything that he's been demanding since negotiations first started back in Turkey in 2022. And therefore, he's not seeking this art of the deal. He's not compromising in any way, shape or form. President Zelensky is playing quite a clever card because he is talking compromise, but he's got his red lines, and we'll see those red lines harden as Putin pushes for them more and more. And those red lines are quite clearly giving up the rest of the Donbass and giving any form of permanent territorial transfer to the Russians. And again, from a wider geopolitical perspective, globally, that would be a very, very dangerous thing to do. I think Donald Trump's motivation is a peace deal at almost any cost because he just wants the Nobel Peace Prize. So the talks will be stranded. The talks will fail completely. Putin will try information operations to suggest it's the Ukrainians that have caused them to fail, but we shall see. And we are in interesting times. Next point comes from Randy. And Randy says, when has Russia ever lived up to any agreement? It didn't even try and help fellow CSTO member Armenia when Azerbaijan attacked it. Hey, Randy, again, you're 100% right. Russia was one of the signatories to the Budapest Memorandum, as was the United States and the United Kingdom. And we did, Russia therefore shouldn't have invaded Ukraine in 2014. And we should have, whenever they did, come to Ukraine's aid. But there's a lot of debate now about the language on the treaty. And it's going to be very difficult for any security guarantees to be taken seriously. And I think we're going to discuss that in another point a little later on. But Russia does not live up to any guarantee whatsoever. Vladimir Putin ignores international agreements. He ignores international law. He uses it as a tool for himself. Russia is one of the biggest prolific users of Interpol red notices, for example, to try and get people extradited and sent to Russia for prosecution. However, the Russian constitution doesn't allow anyone to be extradited out of Russia to be prosecuted in any other country. And therefore, it's always a one-way movement. So we'll see. Next point from Walter. Walter, you say, what we do with Russian assets should not be Trump's problem. The American president speaks disrespectfully and doesn't want to help Europe, but then says, no, we can't touch Russian assets. It's not Trump's business how we protect Ukraine, is it? I think, Walter, I agree with your sentiment, but I think Donald Trump has got a big thing to play in this. And of course, when it comes to the Russian assets, Donald Trump wishes they were sitting in a US monetary facility, not in a European monetary facility. And you look at the proposals that came out in the 28-point plan, a lot of that was taking a big chunk of the Russian assets and having it spent in the United States. And that will play to Donald Trump's desire for the US to get something out of the deal. This all goes back to the art of the deal. And therefore, yes, Trump will be upset that Europe is trying to do something with the assets. We've got more on those assets coming up, I think, fairly soon. European Union is having difficulty getting Belgium to agree to release the assets. And we've got an interview coming out with Bill Browder at some stage soon. And Bill, I think, will turn around and say that the Belgian politicians and those that are heading the financial institutions where the assets are frozen may have been physically threatened. And therefore, that is something that will be impacting the decision making. But I think Europe will come up with a vehicle to be able to give a large amount of money to Ukraine to keep Ukraine going. How they're going to have that paid for and everything else, we shall have to see the detail when it comes out in the small print. Next point comes from Lars. And Lars, you say, can't really agree with Sean Bell here. Time is on the Ukrainian side, even though the civilian suffering is great. It took a few years to put the UK on war footing in World War I, World War II. The same argument could apply to Ukraine. Lars, I can see where you're coming from. I agree with you, and I sort of agree with Sean in many ways. So I'm not quite sitting on the fence. Sean and I openly disagree with and happily disagree with our interpretation of what winning and losing is. He is basing a lot of it on what is happening on the front line. I am basing a lot of it on what is happening overall between the tactical situation on the front line, the operational level of warfare, and the strategic level of warfare. And when we look at it from that perspective, Ukraine is strategically backed by the EU and on and off by the United States. But even when it comes to just EU backing, the Russian economy is about $2.3 trillion. The EU economy is over $200 trillion. And therefore, when it comes to just straight financial power backing, the EU supporting Ukraine will beat Russia hands down all of the time, provided we can keep that political support going for that period of time. America adds an extra level of substance to that support, but I don't think it's as essential as people are making it out to be. So yes, you're right. I will come down, having analysed that as I've gone through your comment, come down on your side against Sean. Sean, if you're listening, let's get another discussion going and we can relook at this again. Next point is from Henry. And Henry, you say, a treaty with Trump's signature on it isn't worth the paper it used. He might be dead next year. On what then? That's very interesting. And yes, you're 100% right. But a treaty with Putin's signature on it isn't worth the paper that's used. And as the Budapest Memorandum has highlighted, a treaty with the UK's Prime Minister's signature on it isn't worth the paper that it's written on. I think one of the things that's coming in the security guarantees, though, with what they're trying to negotiate out of the latest round of talks is to get any treaty enshrined in US law, and therefore it would be enshrined in UK law and European legislation as well, which again will take some time, but that will take it to another level compared to what happened in the Budapest Memorandum. But we're getting into a game of wordsmithing here. And if a country doesn't want to live up to any treaty that it's signed, and if that country is as powerful as the United States, it ain't going to live up to it. And we just have to recognize that as a reality. And this is why I think President Zelensky wants European troops on the ground in the western Ukraine as part of any security guarantee. But then again, those troops would have to be there for an indefinite period. That's a big bill for European nations to pay. And whether Europe would want to have its militaries fixed inside Ukraine for potentially decades. And where I'm coming from on that is, if I look at another peacekeeping operation, let's look at Cyprus. When Turkey invaded the northern part of Cyprus in 1972 or 74, that was described by the United Nations as a short-term issue. There's still British peacekeeping troops and other peacekeeping troops on the peace line between the Turkish northern Cyprus and the Greek southern Cyprus. And that's a short-term issue from the 70s till now. Ukraine could be worse. But very good point. Next point comes from Mikola or Mike. And you say, unfortunately, economic collapse in Russia does not necessarily mean the Putin regime will actually collapse at any time soon, or soon after that. Russia has never been a sustained democracy in its history. You're 100% right in that. And you go on to say, therefore, expecting to act like one is a foolish expectation. Yes, tick, agree completely. More likely than not, Russia will remain a tyranny for a long time. It has been from its Soviet era and through now its Russian era. So tick, yes. And will be able to sustain its regime despite whatever economic problems it will have. Again, tick, yes. The Russian people are under a dictatorship, effectively, and dictators are not driven by the economic woes of the people or the country. So yes, you're right there, and we just have to look at what happened with in Cuba with Castro and how he, no matter what economic sanctions were put on the people there, how he managed to keep a degree of control. And then you go on to say, unfortunately, there is no way that this war can be stopped, and the death can be stopped other than by enticing Putin to agree to a deal, which is what Trump and his people have been doing. This might not be the ideal solution, but it's the only viable solution given practical realities of the situation. And this is one thing that these media pundits seem to be unwilling to understand. I can see where you're coming from. I think there are issues with that because it all depends on what there is in a peace deal. If a peace deal comes in with a permanent transfer of territory to Russia after an aggressive act, that is completely contravening international law as it lies at the moment. That is setting a precedence that is extremely concerning, especially when we've got Xi Jinping eyeing up Taiwan and other countries eyeing up different territories that they think they can take by force. So, yes, I agree that there has to be some form of deal, but this war is only ever going to end whenever there's some form of deal, and it's setting the conditions for that to happen. Where will it go? What is the right deal? Well, for the Ukrainians, the only people that can decide what the right deal for them is the Ukrainians. And therefore, it's wrong that Donald Trump is trying to force their hand down different ways. And if Ukraine thinks that it is still worth paying the price in blood and lives to get the deal conditions set in a way that would be more acceptable to them, then that's a Ukrainian decision. Vladimir Putin is not respecting or reflecting on the decisions of the Russian people. He is just going for what it is that he wants. And therefore, if there is a Putin collapse, there's no natural successor. We don't know who's going to come in afterwards. So this is a big unknown, and it's in Donald Rumsfeld's language, an unknown, and that's very worrying indeed. So I get where you're coming from. There are a huge number of risks attached to the deal, and it all comes in, or any deal, it all comes into what the conditions are that are set in there. President Zelensky has turned around, and he did this before Donald Trump was even inaugurated, and suggested that the front lines are frozen. We're on the line of contact at the moment, and territory that the Russians currently occupy will be dealt with diplomatically at some stage in the future. That seems a very pragmatic solution. Putin doesn't seem to want it. And again, with Putin's economy and the way it is at the moment, Putin doesn't want the conflict to end. And if he doesn't want the conflict to end, no matter what deal is put on the table, he's not going to accept it. So I see where you're coming from. We're in a catch-22 situation, I think. Next point comes from FW Ord, and you say, irony, the name Russia, the name is Russia calling for free elections. Yep, take. I can't say anything more than that. Russia calling for free elections. Yes, just like Russia calling for peace. You've hit the nail on the head. And final point comes from Adrian, and you say, surely it's very unlikely that Russia would sue in a civil court. That would lift its immunity as a court and make it liable for all of the damages inflicted in the war, not just the damage, which is the trillions, but all the planes they stole, the enterprise it seized, etc. And the second point is that frozen money could be allocated for a loan, not the loan itself. 300 billion is about 0.15% of the EU GDP. However, big the amount of money is, something that the EU would be able to get in bonds in a few days. I think those are two very valid points. Russia does use lawfare in different places, and it is trying to sue the Belgians, but not in a civil court in Belgium, but in a Russian court. So it's trying to get a Russian court decision, and therefore can control that. Whether it'll then take that to any international court, I agree with you. I don't think they'll do that, because that's one step too far, and Russia doesn't want an international court finding against it. It's playing a game to try and elongate things. It's creating uncertainty. It's maskirovka. It's masking what's really going on. That's a great Russian tactic, and Donald Trump is falling for it. And then in your second point, yeah, 100%. I think that's exactly what is going to happen, or what has happened, because as I'm recording this, the announcement's just coming out that the EU has agreed a $90 billion loan to Ukraine. And that loan is linked somehow to a debt that will be put against Russia whenever Russia pays that debt to Ukraine. I'm not an economist. I'm not an international finances expert. I haven't gone through the detail of it yet, but it seems as if, Adrian, you hit the nail on the head. So thanks for watching this week's Q&A and posting your questions. Remember, if you want exclusive access to our videos and have your questions answered, please sign up for Times Radio membership. And let your friends, colleagues, and all the rest of it know. Get them to sign up as well, because it's good to have new interaction, as we've had today from Adrian and FW Ord and others. And remember, Frontline is now available on your favourite podcast outlet. Just search for Times Radio Frontline. I'm Philip Ingram. Have a great week. Thank you. Goodbye.